The bloodstained dress hit the metal table with a soft thud that echoed through the small interrogation room like a gunshot. Officer Martinez looked at me with those cold, calculating eyes I'd learned to fear over the past 6 months. "Stay quiet. Just smile," he whispered, his voice carrying the same menacing tone he'd used the night everything changed. My hands shook uncontrollably, my heart racing so fast I thought it might burst from my chest. Fear gripped every bone in my body. I wanted to run, to scream, to tear down the walls and escape this nightmare. But something, terror, maybe, or years of conditioning, forced me to stay frozen in that plastic chair. Then Detective Sarah Chun stepped closer, her eyes piercing through the suffocating darkness that seemed to fill every corner of the room. She opened a thick manila file, her voice steady and determined. "What you think you know is a lie." The room froze. My breath caught in my throat. In that moment, I realized my life would never be the same. Because that bloodstained dress, it belonged to my sister. And Officer Martinez, the man the entire town trusted, the man who'd promised to find her killer, he was the one who had taken everything from me. Let me take you back to the beginning, because understanding this story means understanding how a monster in uniform destroyed my family and nearly destroyed me too. My name is Jessica Torres, and 6 months ago, I was just another 17-year-old girl living in the small town of Cedar Falls, Texas. Population 8,000, where everyone knows everyone, and cops are supposed to be the good guys. My sister Gabriella was 19, beautiful, and full of dreams. She worked nights at the local diner to save money for college, always walking home alone down Maple Street around 2 a.m. I used to worry about her, but she'd laugh and say, "Jess, this is Cedar Falls. Nothing bad ever happens here." She was wrong. On March 15th, Gabriella never came home from work. I waited up until dawn, pacing our tiny living room while Mom called every hospital within 50 miles. By noon, we knew something terrible had happened. Officer David Martinez was assigned to the case. He was young for a cop, maybe 28, with kind eyes and a gentle way of speaking that made you trust him instantly. The whole town respected him. He'd grown up here, played football for Cedar Falls High, married his high school sweetheart. "Don't worry, Mrs. Torres," he told my mother that first day, his hand on her shoulder in what seemed like genuine comfort. "I'll find Gabriella. I promise you that." He seemed so sincere, so determined. We believed him completely. Martinez visited our house every few days with updates. He'd sit at our kitchen table, drinking Mom's coffee and explaining how the investigation was progressing. He interviewed Gabriella's coworkers, checked security cameras, followed up on every lead. "These cases take time," he'd say, looking directly into my eyes with what I thought was compassion. "But I won't give up on your sister. She deserves justice." What I didn't know then was that every visit to our house was reconnaissance. Every sympathetic conversation was him studying us, learning our routines, figuring out how to manipulate our grief. The first red flag came 3 weeks after Gabriella disappeared. I was walking home from school when Martinez pulled up beside me in his patrol car. "Jessica, hop in. I want to show you something." I got in without hesitation. Why wouldn't I? He was the cop looking for my sister. Instead of driving toward town, he headed out to the old quarry road, a desolate stretch of dirt and rocks where teenagers sometimes went to party. My stomach started to twist with unease. "Officer Martinez, where are we going?" He glanced at me, and for just a second, his expression was different. "Harder. Call me David, Jessica. We're going to be spending a lot of time together." He parked beside an abandoned warehouse I'd never noticed before. "I found something that might be connected to Gabriella's case, but I need you to see it first. Before I tell your mother." Inside the warehouse, he led me to a back room where he'd set up what looked like a makeshift office. Folding table, metal chairs, boxes of files. On the table was a plastic evidence bag containing a torn piece of fabric. "Do you recognize this?" he asked. It was a piece of Gabriella's work uniform, the distinctive blue and white checked pattern from the diner. "Where did you find this?" "Here, in this room." His voice had changed, become quieter, more intimate. "Jessica, I think your sister might have been held here before whatever happened to her. I should have run. I should have demanded he take me home immediately." Instead, I let him convince me to keep this discovery secret. If word gets out too soon, it could compromise the investigation, he explained. Can you trust me on this? Can you keep our secret? I nodded, still staring at that piece of fabric, still believing he was trying to help. That was my first mistake. Over the next month, Martinez would pick me up after school twice a week, always with the same excuse. New evidence to show me, new questions about Gabriella's habits and friends. Each time we'd go to the warehouse. Each time, he'd reveal a little more supposed evidence. An earring that might have been Gabriella's. A photograph of tire tracks. Pages of handwritten notes about suspects he was tracking down. But slowly, subtly, the conversations changed focus. You're very mature for 17, Jessica. Much more mature than most girls your age. You understand things that other people don't. That's why I can share this investigation with you. You're helping me more than you know. Gabriella would be proud of how strong you're being. The grooming was so gradual, so expertly manipulated, that I didn't recognize it for what it was. He made me feel special, chosen, important. In my grief and desperation, I clung to the idea that I was helping find my sister. Then came the afternoon when everything shifted. Jessica, he said as we sat in that dim warehouse room, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Okay, has anyone ever hurt you? Touched you in ways that made you uncomfortable? My face burned with embarrassment. No. Why would you ask that? Because I think whoever took Gabriella might have been watching both of you. I think you might be in danger too. The fear that shot through me was electric, paralyzing. I can protect you, he continued, moving his chair closer to mine. But you have to trust me completely. No secrets between us. No telling anyone else about our investigation. Can you do that? I nodded, terrified and grateful and completely under his control. Good. Because Jessica, I'm going to need you to do some things that might seem strange, but they're all part of catching the person who took your sister. That's when the real nightmare began. Martinez convinced me that to catch Gabriella's killer, I needed to act as bait. He had me change clothes in the warehouse, into outfits that looked similar to what Gabriella wore to work. He took photographs of me from different angles, claiming they were for comparison purposes. The killer has a type, he explained. Young Hispanic women with long dark hair. We need to understand his psychology. He had me walk through staged scenarios, approaching the warehouse like I was coming home from work, acting frightened when he'd suddenly appear from the shadows. All practice, he said, for when we'd stage the real operation to catch the killer. The physical contact started small. A hand on my shoulder when I seemed too tense. Adjusting my posture for photographs. Standing too close when he explained evidence. You're very beautiful, Jessica. Just like Gabriella. That's probably what attracted him to her. When I try to pull away or express discomfort, he'd immediately shift back to the investigation. I know this is hard. I know it's scary. But we're so close to finding who hurt your sister. Don't you want justice for Gabriella? Of course I did. More than anything. So I stayed silent when his hands lingered too long. I didn't tell my mother about our private meetings. I kept all his secrets because I thought I was helping catch a killer. I was 17 years old, grieving, and being systematically manipulated by someone who understood exactly how to exploit my pain. The truth began to unravel on a rainy Thursday in June. Martinez had called me during lunch, his voice urgent and excited. Jessica, I need you to come to the warehouse immediately. I found something big, something that's going to break this case wide open. I skipped my afternoon classes and rode my bike through the rain to meet him. When I arrived, soaked and shivering, Martinez seemed different. More agitated. There were dark circles under his eyes, and his usually perfect uniform was wrinkled. What did you find? I asked. Instead of answering, he locked the door behind me. The sound of the bolt sliding home made my blood freeze. David, what are you doing? Sit down, Jessica. His voice had changed. Gone was the gentle, protective tone I'd grown accustomed to. This was the voice of someone giving orders, not making requests. On the table was a large cardboard box I'd never seen before. Martinez opened it slowly, theatrically, like he was savoring the moment. Inside were clothes. Women's clothes. Torn, stained, carefully folded. My heart started racing as I recognized some of the items. A blue diner uniform, a silver bracelet, a pair of white sneakers with a distinctive scuff on the left toe. Gabriella's clothes. You found them, I whispered. Where? Did you catch him? Martinez laughed, and the sound was like broken glass scraping against concrete. Oh, Jessica. Sweet, naive Jessica. He pulled out the diner uniform, holding it up to the fluorescent light. Dark stains cover the front. I didn't find these. I've had them all along. The warehouse seemed to spin around me. I don't understand. Your sister was so trusting, just like you. When I offered her a ride home that night, told her there had been some break-ins in her neighborhood and it wasn't safe to walk, she got in my car without hesitation. No, this wasn't happening. She fought harder than I expected, though. Got blood all over her uniform before I could subdue her properly. I tried to stand, tried to run, but my legs wouldn't work. Martinez moved between me and the door. And you, Jessica, you've been so helpful these past few months. Coming here willingly, keeping our secrets, letting me photograph you in all those different outfits. He tilted his head, studying me like I was an interesting specimen. Did you really think I was trying to solve your sister's murder? The investigation. There is no investigation. The case is officially unsolved, probably always will be. Small-town police departments aren't exactly known for their thorough work. Martinez reached into the box again and pulled out something that made my world collapse completely. Gabriella's necklace. The silver cross our grandmother had given her before she died. I kept this one for last, he said, fastening it around his own neck. She was wearing it when she begged me not to hurt her. When she promised she'd do anything I wanted if I just let her go home to her family. I couldn't breathe. Couldn't think. The room was closing in around me. But here's the thing, Jessica. I did let her go home. In a way. His smile was monstrous. She's buried in your backyard, under your mother's rose garden. She's been there all along, listening to you and your mom cry for her every night. What happened next still feels like a nightmare I can't wake up from. Martinez had been planning this moment for months, the moment when he'd reveal the truth and watch me break apart. But he'd underestimated something crucial my sister had taught me to fight. When he stepped closer, probably intending to do to me what he'd done to Gabriella, I grabbed the nearest weapon I could find, a heavy metal picture frame from his makeshift desk, and swung it as hard as I could at his head. The blow stunned him just long enough for me to unlock the door and run. I ran through the rain, through the woods, stumbling and falling and getting back up until I reached the main road. A passing truck driver found me collapsed beside the highway, hysterical and covered in mud. At the hospital, it took 2 hours for me to convince anyone that Officer David Martinez had killed my sister. Even then, they probably wouldn't have believed me if Martinez hadn't made one critical mistake. In his arrogance, in his certainty that he'd broken me completely, he left all the evidence in that warehouse room. Gabriella's clothes, her jewelry, photographs he'd taken of both of us, and a journal where he documented every detail of his crimes. Because Gabriella wasn't his first victim, and I wasn't meant to be his last. Detective Sarah Chin arrived from the state police that evening. She was everything Martinez pretended to be, professional, thorough, genuinely determined to find the truth. Jessica, she said as we sat in the hospital room, I need you to tell me everything. Every conversation, every visit, every time he took you to that warehouse. I know it's going to be difficult, but other girls' lives might depend on it. Other girls. The words hit me like a physical blow. Over the next 6 hours, I told Detective Chun everything I could remember. She took notes without judgment, asked clarifying questions without making me feel ashamed or stupid for trusting Martinez. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Jessica, what you've told me matches patterns we've been tracking across 3 counties. Missing young women, cases assigned to Martinez that never got properly investigated, evidence that disappeared from lockup. How many? We think at least 7, maybe more. You're the first person who survived long enough to tell us what really happened. That night, they arrested Martinez at his home. He was sitting at his kitchen table, calmly eating dinner with his wife and 2 young daughters, acting like nothing had happened. When Detective Chun placed him in handcuffs, his wife kept asking what was wrong, why they were taking her husband. His daughters, 8 and 10 years old, cried and begged the police not to hurt their daddy. I thought about those little girls a lot in the months that followed. How do you explain to children that their father, their hero, is a monster? The search of our backyard began the next morning. Mom and I stayed at my aunt's house while the forensics team carefully dismantled her rose garden, the same roses she'd been tending every day for 3 months, never knowing she was watering my sister's grave. They found Gabriella 6 feet down, wrapped in plastic tarps, and buried with the kind of precision that suggested Martinez had done this before. The medical examiner said she'd been killed within hours of her disappearance, which meant that every day Martinez visited our house, every conversation about the ongoing investigation, he'd been sitting across from us knowing exactly where she was. The warehouse yielded evidence connecting Martinez to 6 other murders spanning 5 years. Young women between the ages of 16 and 22, all Hispanic, all taken from small towns where Martinez had worked before transferring to Cedar Falls. His method was always the same: gain the family's trust by volunteering to handle their daughter's case personally, then use that access to identify and groom his next victim. He'd specifically requested transfers to small, rural departments where oversight was minimal and missing person cases were often under-investigated. Martinez had turned the badge into a weapon, the uniform into camouflage. He'd used our trust in law enforcement to destroy families across 3 states. The trial lasted 4 months. I testified for 6 hours over 2 days, walking the jury through every manipulation, every lie, every moment when Martinez had used my grief against me. His defense attorney tried to paint me as an unreliable witness, a traumatized teenager whose memories couldn't be trusted. He suggested that maybe Martinez really had been trying to solve Gabriella's case, and I'd misinterpreted his methods due to emotional distress. But the physical evidence was overwhelming. DNA from 7 victims, photographs and journals documenting his crimes in meticulous detail, and testimony from families in other towns who'd experienced the exact same pattern of false hope and manipulation. The moment that broke the case wide open came when Detective Chun presented Martinez's personal computer. He'd been so confident in his ability to manipulate the system that he'd kept digital files on all his victims, photos, personal information, detailed notes about their routines and vulnerabilities. But the most damning evidence was a video file titled Insurance. In it, Martinez sat in what appeared to be his home office, speaking directly to the camera. If anyone ever finds this, it means I got careless. But I want them to understand that everything I did was calculated, purposeful. These girls weren't random victims. They were chosen carefully, studied extensively. The uniform gives you access that ordinary predators can never achieve. People trust cops. Families invite you into their homes, share their secrets, let you get close to their daughters. He went on for 23 minutes, describing his methods, his motivations, his complete lack of remorse. He talked about his victims like they were objects he'd collected, trophies he'd earned. When the prosecution played that video in court, Martinez's wife ran from the courtroom sobbing. His daughters, thank God, weren't there to hear their father's confession. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. Guilty on all counts. 7 counts of first-degree murder, multiple counts of kidnapping, sexual assault, and abuse of authority. Martinez was sentenced to death. When the judge read the verdict, he looked directly at me. Not with the fake compassion I'd grown accustomed to, but with pure hatred. Like somehow this was all my fault for not staying quiet. After the sentencing, Detective Chun found me in the courthouse hallway. "How are you holding up?" "I don't know," I admitted. "Part of me feels like justice was served, but Gabriella is still gone. Those other girls are still gone. Nothing really changes that." "No, but you stopped him from taking more victims. You saved lives, Jessica. I should have seen through him sooner. I should have. You were 17 years old and grieving your sister. He was a trained manipulator who'd perfected these techniques over years of practice. None of this was your fault." Detective Chun handed me a card. "I'm starting a task force to identify other cases like this, officers who abuse their authority to commit crimes. We need people who understand how these predators operate. When you're ready, when you've had time to heal, I hope you'll consider helping us." That was 3 years ago. Today, I work with Detective Chen's task force, helping identify patterns of abuse within law enforcement and training officers to recognize predatory behavior in their own departments. It's difficult work, emotionally draining, but necessary. For every Martinez we catch, there might be dozens more hiding behind badges and uniforms, using their authority to destroy innocent lives. The hardest part isn't the investigation or the trials. It's meeting with families who've experienced what mine went through, parents who trusted the wrong person, siblings who carry guilt that isn't theirs to bear. Last month, I met with Maria Santos, whose 18-year-old daughter disappeared from a small town in New Mexico. The investigating officer had been very attentive to the family, visiting regularly, taking Maria's younger daughter on ride-alongs to help with the investigation. Something feels wrong, Maria told me during our phone call. Officer Rodriguez is so helpful, so concerned, but my daughter Lucia seems uncomfortable around him. She won't tell me why. 2 weeks later, we arrested Officer Rodriguez before he could claim another victim. Lucia's discomfort, her instinctual fear, had saved her life. I still have nightmares sometimes. Not just about Martinez, but about all the girls who didn't survive long enough to expose their killers. I think about the families who are still waiting for answers, still trusting the wrong people, still hoping for justice that may never come. But I also think about the victories, the cases we've solved, the predators we've stopped, the potential victims who are safe because someone finally spoke up. 3 months ago, I got a letter from Martinez in prison. He's on death row now, spending 23 hours a day in solitary confinement, but somehow he still found a way to try to manipulate me one last time. Jessica, I hope you know that everything I did to your family was because I cared about you. You reminded me so much of my own daughter. I was trying to protect you from the real monsters out there. Maybe someday you'll understand that I was never the enemy. David, I burned the letter without finishing it. Because I've learned something important in these past 3 years. Monsters don't just wear obvious disguises. They wear uniforms, badges, and friendly smiles. They use our trust as a weapon, and our grief as ammunition. But they have one fatal weakness. They depend on silence to survive. The moment you refuse to stay quiet, the moment you stop smiling and start speaking truth, their power begins to crumble. Martinez thought he could control me with fear and manipulation. He believed that placing that bloodstained dress on the table and whispering, "Stay quiet, just smile," would break my spirit forever. Instead, it taught me the most important lesson of my life. The truth doesn't care how terrifying it is to speak. It only cares about being spoken. And once you find your voice, no monster, no matter what uniform they're wearing, can silence you again. If this story opened your eyes to something important, please give it a like and subscribe for more stories that expose the truth. Share your thoughts in the comments. Your engagement helps these stories reach people who need to hear them.